What's going on, everybody? Coach MccDann here. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to introduce to you the concept of Super Smash Bros. This lesson will go over understanding the end goal of a Smash Bros match, the competitive rule sets and why they exist, as well as give insight as to how and why those rules have changed over the past few years of Smash Bros history. So you can walk away from our guide with a more clear understanding before getting you into those fights. So, chances are you're a beginner who is looking to understand what the general end goal of a Smash Bros game is. Either that, or you could also be a player who has been interested for a while, but just hasn't understood the game's competitive rule settings and why they exist or differ. Super Smash Bros. Is a fighting game that stands out from the likes of other popular OG titles, like Street Fighter or Tekken. Super Smash Bros., at its core, is a battle to be the last fighter standing. That might have been a tad bit obvious, but let me explain more. Throughout the years, Super Smash Bros. Has offered two traditional modes to enjoy the game: Time Battles mode and primarily Stock Battle, also known as Survival mode in previous games. This mode has been the default option for competitive play and has been established throughout every previous Smash game to the present day. So we'll be going over this mode specifically in this lesson. During a game, each player is given a set amount of stocks to play with. In Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, this default amount of stocks is set to 3. Last person to be eliminated from the match, or with the least amount of damage and most stocks at the end of that game, wins the match. We'll get into that second scenario a little more in a bit. With every competitive game comes its own set of rules, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has its own standard universal rules when it comes to competitive play. We're going to break these down into chunks at a time going forward to make things simple. The next most important rule of a Super Smash Bros. Match is the time set on the clock. Every competitive match has a timer with 7 minutes. But, Coach MccDann, you ask, didn't we just go over how Super Smash Bros. Has its own time battle mode? Why does Stock Battle include a timer? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, the time on the clock within a stock battle is a very important factor in a Smash Bros. Match. Having the correct timer sets the pace for each player's gameplay and prevents sets from going over a specific time frame, which, depending on the competitor's playstyle, can, take a long time. Another primary reason for including a timer in stock mode involves the motive of being the player with the least amount of damage and most stocks at the end of that game. Super Smash Bros. Is a game of playing and taking stocks, but the player who suffered the least amount of damage also wins that game. This concept could be an interesting adjustment to adhere to if you're a beginner who has discovered sudden death, basically the result of when two players get a tie within a match on stocks or percentage. Competitive Smash Bros., however, does not play within this tiebreaker mechanic, and instead allows the player who went that entire 7-minute period with less damage and more lives to claim to be the winner of that game. Okay, what we just went over covers a few key factors in what makes a Smash Bros. Match competitive. Let's go over a few other rules that are established to ensure that you're training in a competitive setting. In competitive Smash, a lot of other options to spice up the game are usually set to off. Super Smash Bros. Is partially considered to be a party game after all, so options like Final Smash Meter, Spirits, Damage Handicap should all be set to off, as well as other options such as Stage Morph, Stage Hazards, Underdog Boost, Custom Balance, Score Display, and finally, Items. Every other option should be kept default. The third most important thing to understand when it comes to Super Smash Bros. Is competitive stages. This is still a very debatable topic in the scene, and we're going to go into why right now. In Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, every previous stage from every previous Super Smash Bros. Game has returned. Along with that comes DLC stages that also have been established as competitive stages. However, what we're going to go into is the importance of why these stages have been selected, and how others are a bit more subjective and change depending on the tournament. Some stages that are firmly established, such as Pokemon Stadium 2, Battlefield, and Final Destination, all have pros and cons that players consider when going into a game. But for the most part, they are considered to be more neutral options for the majority of the player base. When evaluating whether a stage is considered tournament legal or not, a few key factors are set in place, such as slants on a stage, placement of platforms, performance issues, and blast zones. Now, loosen up, you won't have to worry about any game-breaking factors going into a match, as the stages that are already selected keep these aspects in mind and don't hinder either player. Each competitive stage, however, does include factors that make up why there are only so few stages that are tournament legal. If you'd like to learn more about that, be on the lookout for the dedicated video for it soon. So, now you're also probably wondering, how do these stages change? Well, here's the gist of it. With a mix of personal preference ranging from each region, as well as a few stages having similar characteristics, depending on what tournament you go to, some stages will be preferred over others, or even outright excluded from that stage list. There's still so much to cover and discuss when it comes to this topic, so for now, feel free to familiarize yourself with these stages shown on screen, and we'll discuss more on a future guide. Okay, so we've discussed what exactly Smash Bros. Is, gone over how to win a game, and all the rules behind it. So, how exactly do you start? Probably the greatest experience to have with Smash Bros. Is the memories you could take away from learning it. If you have a friend or family member who is a fan of video games as well, I encourage you to invite them to pick up a controller and play with them. Okay. You can also always choose to start training against a CPU with a difficulty level that is most comfortable for you to get started with. Either way, creating a rule set with all of the settings and stage selections we've discussed today is your first step to learning Super Smash Bros. As the fighting platformer game it's always meant to be. Well, that about wraps up this lesson. I'm so honored to be able to introduce to you one of the fighting game community's most beloved franchises throughout history with this guide. Super Smash Bros. As a series challenges even the most casual players to improve their playstyle and abilities, despite their experience with the game. And it allows those players that strive to constantly improve to reap the benefits that come with the patience and endurance it takes to do so. And we here at Game Gym are prepared to set that direction to reach that next goal with you. So I must ask, are you ready to fight?
Game.